live, and welcome to another Life After Hours where we shine a light into the dark recesses of a personal finance topic. And tonight we're talking about debts. And of course, Life After Hours is all about you. And so I'm just going to talk for a little while about the principles, and then we will deal with questions as they come up. But fundamentally, these are all about you. So tonight, get your debts under control. And as always, it's good to put this in the context of the Life Sherpa 8-step process. So we have the 3 foundation steps. So step 1, spend less than you earn, which is about budgeting. Step 2, build an emergency stash, which is about being prepared for when things go a little bit wrong. Step 3, pay off your debts, which is the one we're looking at tonight. Then we have the 3 protective steps. Step 4, being prepared for the unexpected, which is about making sure you got the right insurances and just the right insurances. Sort your super, step 5, so make sure you're on track for a purpose-filled, prosperous, meaningful, lengthy retirement. And step 6, get your paperwork sorted. So that's about making sure that all the paperwork's in place for when you can't make decisions, whether they're financial, contractual, whether they're personal living or medical decisions. So that's about getting the paperwork ready for doing that. And then the exciting stuff, the 2 growth steps, which is buy and pay off your home and invest your surplus. So most of the things that we do around personal finance can be looked at in one of these steps. And so tonight we are focused on step 3, pay off your debts. And just a bit of a trigger warning, that when you start looking at your debts and when you start getting your spending and budget analysed, you may uncover addictive behaviours such as gambling, drugs, alcohol, or compulsive spending, either for you or your partner. And sometimes these need medical treatment. So be aware and share the load. So you need to deal with any of that compulsive behaviour before you can successfully deal with your debts. So if this is you, consider seeing a counsellor or joining a support group. There are plenty of these now, whether it's for compulsive spending or gambling or alcohol or drugs. Don't let this get in the way of getting your life together. So when we start thinking about paying off our debts, we need a basic foundation to support our activities in this nature. And that's really getting your budget under control. And that means knowing where your money's going and being aware of where you'd like it to go, and making room for debt repayment in that is an important point. But in our rush to pay off your debts, don't rush to start doing that. Make sure you do have a little bit of a buffer. So we recommend having a starter emergency stash before you move on to tackling your debts. And then when you've got your debts sorted, you can come back and finish off your emergency stash. But a little bit helps with, when things go a little bit awry, as they will, you can use it to avoid falling back into the debt cycle. So it's important to have a small one. How much is up to you? And that then brings us on to dealing with debt. And debt's important here, partly because it represents what I call a yesterday's tax. That is, it's a tax on today's income paying for yesterday's spending. And it's really hard to plan for tomorrow when you're spending today paying for yesterday. And that's really the fundamentals about why getting rid of your debts is a critical step in your path to financial freedom. And it's not just the interest cost, it's about the mental load that it places on our day-to-day spending and living. And so when we think about debt, um, or when the media talks about debt, we often hear the terms good debt and bad debt. And to me, this is a little bit simplistic, and it's also a bit judgmental. Um, that most debts are represented by some sort of consumption or pleasure that we may have had in the past. And so to stigmatize that with a bad or good simple dichotomy, we don't think is particularly helpful. So rather than thinking good or bad, which contains a whole element of shame and judgment, we rather think about them in three categories. And starting with red debt. So we categorize them as red debt. Red is for danger, so that's something to be very mindful of. And we'll look at what that means and how they arise shortly. Amber debts, amber, when we look at roads, at street signs, means stop unless the way is safe. So these are things you should think about. Not necessarily a big risk, but something you should very much be conscious of. And then green debt, it's not green for go. If you read the highway code, it means proceed if the way is safe. And so green debts can be extremely useful in building up our wealth. And so we'll look at that shortly. So looking at those in more detail, red debts, as I said, red for danger. So be very careful with these. And red debts arise generally from a spending more than you earn. They often don't necessarily have large purchases to go with them. It's just a general overspending. And they usually accumulate slowly over time. Sometimes they happen quickly because of a medical emergency or some other things that meant we needed to get hold of cash quickly and we put it on our credit card. They're generally represented by high interest credit card and personal loans. And these are particularly difficult to get rid of. And they are the ones with the big priority. And they're difficult because you have to stop the excess first. So if they're arising because you're simply spending more than you earn, you have to reduce your spending to at least what you earn to stop it getting worse. And then you need to reduce it further to start making headway into repaying them. So they can be challenging. And so number one is start by spending less than you earn, and then by either reducing your spending or increasing your income or both, and then start looking at repaying these debts. Amber debts, on the other hand, as I said, these should be treated with caution. These generally arise from spreading the cost of some long-lasting asset, such as your home or car, over the period over which you're going to own these assets. They're usually lower interest rate than credit cards or personal loans and are usually backed by the asset that corresponds to the debt. So when we buy a home, we have a home loan or a mortgage, and the home itself forms the security for that loan. So we get a very attractive interest rate from the bank. Similarly, car loans sit somewhere between, certainly secured car loans or novated leases or car leases, sit somewhere between home loans and personal loans, but certainly well less than credit cards. And so as a general rule, I would say don't worry too much about these as long as you've not bought too much house or too much car. And also as long as your interest rate is not credit card type rate. So check it out first before you move on to look at that. So that's amber debts. And that brings us on to green debts. And green debts are ones that we shouldn't worry too much about. They generally relate to growing our asset base or growing our earning capacity. These include investment loans, whether that's to buy real estate or to buy shares. It includes, of course, our help debt or HECS, which we would expect that having a degree will have increased our earning capacity. So it's green in that sense. So the thing to check out is, am I actually getting a return on that asset? So does the return exceed the cost of the debt? And if it is, don't worry about these for now. There are a few occasions where it's worth looking at making additional HEX repayments, but generally only if you can get rid of it completely, and that will usually be in the context of buying a home. So that's something that really depends on the circumstances. And so when you're talking to your mortgage broker about borrowing for your first home, that's a great time to talk about whether you'd be better off using some of your savings to pay down your debt, your HEX debt, rather than putting down as a deposit on the home. Lots of moving parts there, so talk to your broker or Sherpa. So they're the three categories of debts, and clearly we want to focus on the red ones first. And when it comes to paying off debt, this is often something that can be quite hard to get going. And there's probably two big things that you need to get right before you embark on an exercise of slaying your debts. And the first one really is to believe in yourself and believe that you can. And that might sound a little trite, but it really is important to believing that it can be done. It may seem daunting, particularly if these debts are large, and it is important to have a reason for doing it and to believe that you can do it. So believe in yourself is rule number one. And some of that can come by understanding how you got here in the first place. So, and how that made you feel. So think about what's the worst that you ever felt because of being in debt. You might have felt much worse in the past. Something might have happened. You might have had an argument with your partner. You might have bought something that you really oughtn't to have. And getting that feeling clear in your mind is part of the impetus for starting and continuing and persevering through to the end, and part of believing in why you want to do it and that you can in fact be successful at doing this. And so Stephen Covey wrote a book called The 7 Habits of Successful People. And one of the things he talks about in the book is about having a deeper yes. So understanding why you're doing what you're about to do. And paying off debt is just another one of those personal finance decisions that requires a yes to something to be backed up by a no to something else. And so by being sure about why you want to do this and have a burning yes inside, it becomes very easy to achieve the no that needs to go with that. And that's pretty critical. So when it comes to paying off debt, there are sort of 4 key steps here. And the first one is to make sure that you're making at least the minimum payments on all of your debts. You need to stop making it worse. So stop borrowing more so that you're not digging a deeper hole for yourself to dig yourself out of. And again, that comes back to getting your spending plan in place. And step 3 is to look at your budget. Now that you've got the minimum payments sorted, how much more can I dedicate to paying off those debts? So work out how much you've got left, and then use the surplus to pay down your debts. And the question that then arises, well, which debt should I apply it to? So we'll come back to that in just a moment, but the key point is to do one at a time. I'll come back to which one later, but the important message to take from here is that having stopped making your spending worse, identified an amount of money that you can apply to paying them off, then apply that surplus to one debt at a time. And so we can see that in this circular slide here. So pick a debt to focus on, pay all of that extra payment. So the cash that you've allocated over and above your minimum payments on all of the debts gives an amount that you can apply to a single debt until that debt is gone. And then when that debt is gone, celebrate the win and then pick the next debt and go around this circle a few times and the job is done. So that raises the question of, well, which debt do I deal with first? And there are quite a few theories around this. So in many ways, the answer is the one that suits you best. And that could be the smallest debt first. It could be the highest interest debt first. It could be the one that bothers you most first. All of those techniques have merits, but the important point is to think about there being one debt and focus on it. So let's have a look at how we might do that. Definitely want to focus on our red debts first. We've already identified that these are generally the most expensive ones. They're often relatively small individually. And now that you've got your spending plan in place, that you're not making it worse, now's the opportunity to start looking at those. And so if we're going to say, let's focus on red debts first, the question is, well, which red debt? And that's where the interesting philosophical thought comes in. And the reason why we want to do one at a time is because of this dopamine hit that we get when we get rid of one of those. So achieving goals is really good for us. So the human brain craves these little wins. And so although our natural human instinct is to pay a little bit off each debt at a time, in our human sense of fairness, we actually get a better dopamine hit if we focus on one at a time. And it's less important which one than it is one at a time. So before we do this, the question is, well, which one do I start with? Do I start with the one that bothers me most, even if that might not carry interest? Is it a loan from your parents that makes Christmas dinner awkward? Is it a loan for something that particularly bothers you? We had one member who had a fairly high interest loan on money that she borrowed to pay her lawyer's bill to get her divorce sorted. And every time she saw the debt, she thought about the arguments they had leading up to that. So getting rid of that really mattered emotionally to her. Other debts with particularly extreme rates, those payday loans, if you've got a nimble loan or a cash converters loan, these can carry very high interest rates, and sometimes you just need them gone. And the other thing that you could look at is loans that have a particularly high monthly payment. They may not be particularly big, but they consume quite a bit of your spending. So getting rid of them frees up a lot of cash to pay off other debts. All of these are perfectly reasonable approaches to choosing which debt to go first. The reason we call this the debt snowball is that, although you might have heard the term debt avalanche, the idea is that as you roll this snowball down the hill, you free up more cash, so you get your snowball bigger, and eventually it just develops a life of its own and gets you out faster. So the mathematical answer to this question is obviously you should start with the highest interest rate loan first, because that's the one that will mathematically lead to you paying less interest over time, and therefore you should be able to pay it out faster. In practice, however, that doesn't always work, and the evidence shows that starting with the smallest one gets you a quick win and frees up more money for the other debt. So often starting with the smallest one is the one that leads to the greatest success. And so that's generally the approach that we would take, with the proviso that if there's something that particularly bothers you, like our friend's divorce lawyer's loan, that feeling of anger or concern about that debt trumps the benefits of smallest first. So generally try and start with the smallest unless there's something that bothers you particularly. And the advantage of that is that you quickly free up some cash for the next one. So that's really all I wanted to talk to about debt. We have a course for our members which goes through this in a lot more detail and has a number of workshops, work papers, workbooks that help you do this analysis. And really the process is make a list of all of your debts, who you owe, how much you owe, what the minimum payment is, and rank those in some order based on the analysis that we've just been through, and then focus on one at a time. There's an old story about how do you eat an elephant. You eat it one mouthful at a time. And so taking bite-sized chunks of all of this is the key to it. So that's really all I wanted to say about debt specifically. So now is the time to turn to your questions.